So, we've just talked around the really important settings, but I'm sure some people, in fact, probably most people who've got controllers, be looking at that and thinking, well, hang on a second. That might be his settings, but there's so many controls here anyway. How the hell am I going to do that on my gear? Well, listen, you're going to do it on your gear. You can do it on any kind of gear. We're going to show you what's really important here. And it's a very short list of things that you need to be able to have on your gear to do what James does. So we're going to talk through them. We're going to start with the deck, then we're going to move on to the mixer, and we're going to give you advice on where these things might be or how to hack it, depending on what you have. So let's start with the deck. Which controls are the most important to you on a deck when you're DJing, James?
Firstly, hot cues. Anybody who's watched my videos knows how much I'm going to use those hot cues.
So they are up here, but they haven't always been up here. They're down the side of the old one.
There.
They're probably down here in a little set of 4 on your gear. Doesn't make the blindest bit of difference, right? As long as you've got them. Hot cues let you set a point on a track, and that point gets remembered. So next time you load that track, that hot cue is still there. He's very precious about his hot cues. I've said, let's just move that one there. And he's like, get off. He's like, I wouldn't let anyone change my hot cues. I'm certainly not going to let you. So hot cues are great because you can save them, right? You can,
and I know where I'm jumping to within the track.
Okay, so you're going to need to be able to set hot cues. You don't need to be able to set scores and scores of them. You've got room to set 8. I guess is plenty enough, right? Nearly all gear has 8 hot cues. Even if your gear has 4, you'll probably be okay. So hot cues. The second thing,
quantize.
Okay, so quantize means that whatever you do, it snaps to the nearest beat, keeps it very clean. And you use that a lot in looping, right?
I do. I like to be able to access it because sometimes I need to turn it on and turn it off.
Okay, so quantize is one of those things that's probably important, although as you'll see further on in the course, if you've got a way on your DJ gear of setting a very clean 1-beat loop without needing quantize, you might get away with not having it. Just bear in mind that quantize, if you're using CDJs, is important. And knowing where your quantize button is, all DJ gear has quantize, but knowing where that is. And if you think you do want to use it and it's not got a button, there's normally a way on software to map it to a button you don't use so much. So there's always a way to hack these things. That's one thing you've got to get out of this.
When I filmed a video with the DDJ 400, I mapped the quantize to a keyboard shortcut on my laptop.
On your laptop, right. So there you go. So it's there's always a way around this. Okay, so we've talked about hot cues. We've talked about the quantize button. What next?
We got loops in and out.
So loop in and out on a Pioneer system like this, there's 2 buttons, loop in and loop out. And you use them manually. You say, I want it in here, I want it out here. That's fine. There might just be, on your DJ gear, loops on your pads. So these are only hot cues, but on DJ gear where you get pads at the bottom, quite often they're multi-pads. They can be used for all kinds of things. And it might be that one of those is loops. And that might be the only way you can access loops. Fine, use that. One of those buttons will be a 1-beat loop, which is the one you need. Also, you might have a loop encoder, which is a infinity kind of knob that goes around forever and that clicks. And pressing it down turns the loop on, pressing it down turns the loop off, and turning it left or right doubles or halves the length of the loop. That's fine, isn't it? You just need to be able to, because that's the next thing, you need to be able to double or half the length of the loop that you set. So a way of turning loops on and off and doubling and halving the length. Okay, what's next?
Saved loops. So we need a way to access saved loops. We need to know where that is, whether that's saving them on a button or a pad, or having an active loop that you've engaged in your software.
Okay, so a saved loop is essentially the same as a hot cue, but it's a loop. So when you press the button again, instead of going to that point and just playing, it goes to that point and loops. And like James says, there's a few ways of doing this. Depends on your software and hardware, which ones you get access to. Pioneer lets you kind of save it with the file, so the track will play to that point and then loop forever. That's great. As long as you've got some way of remembering a loop in your software, which all software does, all hardware does somewhere, you're going to be golden. I think that's it for the decks, isn't it? Apart from the fact you've got to be able to get quickly to your playlists. So have a way of being able to quickly access your list, because as you know, James works around lists. We've already taught you about that. You're going to see a lot of them. You see a lot of him jumping into them throughout the course. Right. This little baby.
Onto the mixer.
It's all effects really here, isn't it?
It is. What do we need on the mixer that we need to know where it is? Okay, so a really important one for me is filters. When we're on the Pioneer mixer, it's very obvious. We've got the filter on button, and up and down, and a lot of controllers are going to have a very similar functionality.
Smaller controllers, cheaper controllers, all that knob does is probably filter. If you've got a slightly older controller or a very cheap controller, it might not even have individual knobs here, but there's going to be somewhere on that controller where you can set an effect which has got a filter on it, which you can assign to those channels. Again, you're not going to get everything exactly as it's laid out here unless you've got this gear. And again, there's always a way. So if you really get stuck, of course, you can ask underneath about any of these things. That's not the only effect you use though.
No, I use echo quite a lot. Now on the Pioneer mixers, the echo is within the effects section, which is switched on and controlled by this and the knob here. And I tend to use the echo, most of the time I'm using the echo on a 3/4 beat, which would be called a 1/8 dotted beat if you were in Serato.
Yeah, and it's effectively an echo that's halfway between a half beat echo and a 1 beat echo. Yep. Have a look for it on your system. Most systems have it. I mean, you can get away with using, say, a half beat echo or a 1 beat echo if you have to. Totally. It will sound a bit different.
Yeah.
But you might not have this strip down here.
Yeah.
You might have an effects unit above each jog wheel if you've got a controller, and that's absolutely fine. You can set that to echo, assign it to the channels that you're using. You need to be able to say, I want this to work on this channel or that channel, and that's fine. You know, if you haven't got filter knobs, if you haven't got this kind of strip, but you've got an effects unit above each jog wheel, set one to filter and one to echo.
Exactly, yeah.
And there you go. You've got the same thing. And the final, it's not really an effect, it's kind of like an add-on.
Yeah, is the noise. And with this mixer, we've got a button for noise there. And when we turn that on, we can turn any of these channels into a noise generator.
And that's going to just make a whooshy noise.
Yep.
And this is something you use a lot in build-ups.
Yep.
Again, if you haven't got this on your system, you could always use a sampler, couldn't you?
You could always use a sample of some noise playing on a deck, and then use that with the filter to create a very similar effect.
So again, this is often hackable. I think you'd be the first to say that you kind of hacked this gear to do what you wanted to do.
Yeah, for sure, yeah.
And I guess if the gear had slightly different functions, you'd find different ways of using it.
Exactly, yeah.
So it's not as if you can't do this stuff, but your buttons, knobs, faders and settings are going to necessarily be different to what you're seeing here, depending on what gear you're on. And the final thing I think we need to talk about is the number of decks, because you've got 4 decks here.
Yeah.
Most people will be on a controller, and they certainly haven't. There's no controller I know of that looks like this.
Yeah, totally.
So you need 4 decks to do most of the stuff, some of the stuff you're going to see here. It's best to have 4 decks. On a controller, that means...
Well, it means layers, doesn't it?
Yep. Yeah. So those layer buttons mean that it's possible to do this on a controller, because you basically get one jog wheel there, one there, but each one can control 2 decks. If your controller has 4 channels here, you really are brilliant. It's going to be the tiniest change to work. Even if your controller has 2 channels here, as long as it's got 2 layers, so you can play 4 channels at once, it's going to be fiddlier, but you'll be able to get around it.
Yeah.
And even if your controller hasn't, you did an amazing routine on a little DDJ 400 that we look at the last module of this course, or one of the modules towards the end of this course. How did you get around not having 4 decks?
Well, there are things that you can still use within the 400. You can use the sampler to trigger other things which play separately to the decks. That would allow you to have. You could actually have 4 things going at once with
2 samples. Yeah. So again,
there's always ways to work out what you want to do within the limitations of your equipment.
But you know, that's it. There's so many functions and features on here that we haven't talked about. So many amazing effects. So many things that pads and stuff that you just don't need. So don't think that when you look at this gear with all its features, that even someone of the technical skills of James uses anywhere near all of it. No DJ uses all of it, and you don't need to use all of it either. We've just drawn your attention to the really important stuff. So your homework here is to go away, find everything we've talked about, get used to how it works, and work out where it is on your system. Serato, Traktor, Rekordbox, Virtual DJ, Denon. It's going to be different to Pioneer, and that's good. Just work out where it is.
Yep.